Hello. Happy Wednesday. Happy Wednesday. The 25th. 25th of May. Wednesday, the 25th of May. I need to refresh. It's the glorious 25th of May. I wonder if anybody's wearing the lily. Also, Towel Day. What? What are you supposed to do on Towel Day? Besides lilac. The lilac? How is everybody? As I figure out what these notifications I'm getting are about. You're supposed to make sure you know where your towel is? I thought that was every day. If you were a hoopy frood. So there's nothing unusual about Towel Day? Douglas Adams' birthday. Well, happy birthday to Douglas Adams. It looks like Books, Brews, and Booze and Sharkies are both in the viewer list. No, not Douglas Adams' birthday. I take it back. I don't know whether the viewer list is to be trusted necessarily. But it says that they're there. They're there. There. Sharkies. Pardon the bees. Our cat was on the keyboard. I didn't even get a message on my side with bees, so maybe it got auto deleted or something. If it was just a bunch of bees. Yeah, if there was, it didn't show up on my end. Also, hello. Hi, Sharkies. Happy Wednesday. Happy glorious 25th of May. As I notice that this hat is skewed and this cat is on the ground. Come on, you two, get along. A little bit of a balancing act. But it's necessary for this book. Alright, that'll do. Carmel says it is apparently still Towel Day. Okay. Alright. It's Towel Day, everybody. It's also the glorious 25th of May. I don't think you're supposed to wear a lilac unless you were there, though. Yes, Books, Brews, and Brews, we missed you on Friday. Welcome back. In my copy, we're on page 172. You missed about 15 years of reading. Believe it or not. Sharkies, yes, though I forgot to wear my towel earrings this morning to mark the occasion. cowl earrings. You're on 154. Oh boy, did we read way too much? Yeah, that's where we started last time. So we read 155 up to 172. Sharky say they're tiny towels, and one says 42 and the other says don't panic. That's adorable. Farmo says it's like 2 weeks after the anniversary of Adam's death, which I think is why this day was chosen. Stupid work. Ah. Okay, say in our edition it's page 216, but we've already discovered it's much different. Yeah, that's still that's a drastically different amount of pages. 172 versus 216, like it's not even close. So there's some significant gaps or something. Like I don't know what is different about yours that you're through so many more pages to be in the same place in the story. Like, I guess it's just all more spread out. Yeah, bigger font or more spaces between letters or lines or something like that. Some combination of those things, but 216 versus 172. "44 pages ahead. You are 44 pages ahead of us." That's a lot of pages. That's odd. This is what it looks like for me as far as font and spacing and things goes. So, yeah, I don't know. So, to catch Books, Brews, and Booze up, let's see, since last we met, the Fool and Magrat sat themselves down on a log overlooking the kingdom and had some awkward conversation. She somewhat tried to convince him, he gave her sort of a life history, which was honestly kind of tragic. Sounds like he's basically never been happy. She talked a little about becoming a witch, but not nearly so much as is Sleet's video on yet. We're just seeing that side. Try refreshing the page. Sometimes when I start I need to refresh my side of the page, but for me it is coming through on Twitch. So yeah, you may need to refresh. Yeah, she talked a little bit about her becoming a witch, but not as much as he spoke. And then they did a kiss. That's right. They kissed each other. And pretty much at that moment, Nanny Og and Granny Weatherwax completed the spell together, finished circling the kingdom. There was some meddling by Nanny Og, as she had sent her family out to find every cockerel in the kingdom and basically strangle them to delay their crowing. You got it to work, hooray! But they finished the spell, which meant that Magrat and the Fool's Kiss lasted roughly 15 years. And then they did a second kiss just to try and get it right. Let's see, then we had a little bit of a pharmacist. You gotta practice those kisses. Then we got to see a little bit of the theater troupe, which is no longer traveling. They have settled down in Ankh Morpork, where they are currently in the process of constructing the disc, not to be confused with the globe, since we are on the Discworld. But Tom John had talked his father into building the Discworld's first stationary theater, since apparently they had been earning a decent amount of money. And we got a look at some of Hwell's writing process. And they had a little bit of a talk about dreams, because Hwell had a dream about some bandy-legged odd person walking along a road. Also, in an unrelated topic, the Fool was being sent out by the Duke to go find a playwright, and so I believe he's on his way to Ankh Morpork. And Tom John had a dream where he was in a bowl being looked at by a group of witches. And it's funny because it seems like he gets the sound of them in his dream, even though they don't get the sound of him through their viewing process. Maybe that's why they're not getting the sound on. Maybe it's reversed. And, yes, Tom John is officially old enough to go out drinking now. The last time we saw him, he was just a wee lad. Asking Hwell how one goes about quaffing, to which Hwell replied, "I think it means you spill most of it." And that's where we're at, on page 172. There. You're all caught up. Books, Brews and Brews, BBB. BB-Bab. No, B-Bab. That would be it. B-Bab. BBAB. What does that remind me of? One of those songs by that Pineapple Pen guy. Yeah. So, it's 7:15. Why don't we pick up from there? Everybody ready? Ready, Freddy? Ready, steady? Redder, cheddar? I don't know. Alright. In my copy, page 172. In the Sharky's copy, page 216. If the water of the river Ankh was rather thicker and more full of personality than ordinary river water, so the air in the mended drum was more crowded than normal air. It was like dry fog. Sharkies agree. Pineapple Pen Guy thought so too. BBAB. For the unfamiliar, the Mended Drum is an infamous tavern in Ankh Morpork. I think once upon a time it was not the Mended Drum, it was just the drum or something like that. And then it kind of got destroyed, but then it got rebuilt as the Mended Drum. If I'm remembering my history correctly. It was called the Broken Drum at some point. Is that what it was? Tom John and Hwell watched it spilling out into the street. The door burst open, and a man came through backward, not actually touching the ground until he hit the wall on the opposite side of the street. An enormous troll, employed by the owners to keep a measure of order in the place, came out dragging 2 more limp bodies, which he deposited on the cobbles, kicking them once or twice in soft places. I imagine to a troll any place is a soft place. "I reckon they're roistering in there, don't you?" said Tom John. "It looks like it," said Hwell. He shivered. He hated taverns. People always put their drinks down on his head. They scurried in quickly while the troll was holding one unconscious drinker up by one leg and banging his head on the cobbles in a search for concealed valuables. Farmo said it was called the Broken Drum for like 10 or so pages in The Color of Magic before it got destroyed, I guess. Drinking in the drum has been likened to diving in a swamp, except that in a swamp, the alligators don't pick your pockets first. 200 eyes watched the pair as they pushed their way through the crowd to the bar. 100 mouths paused in the act of drinking, cursing, or pleading, and 99 brows crinkled with the effort of working out whether the newcomers fell into Category A, people to be frightened of, or B, people to frighten. Tom John walked through the crowd as though it was his property, and, with the impetuosity of youth, rapped on the bar. Impetuosity was not a survival trait in the Mended Drum. "2 pints of your finest ale, landlord," he said, in tones so carefully judged that the barman was astonished to find himself obediently filling the first mug before the echoes had died away. Hwell looked up. There was an extremely big man on his right, wearing the outside of several large bulls, and more chains than necessary to moor a warship. A face that looked like a building site with hair on it glared down at him. "Bloody hell," it said. "It's a bloody lawn ornament." Hwell went cold. Cosmopolitan as they were, the people of Morpork had a breezy, no-nonsense approach to the non-human races, i.e., hit them over the head with a brick and throw them in the river. This did not apply to trolls, naturally, because it is very difficult to be racially prejudiced against creatures 7 feet tall who can bite through walls, at least for very long. But people 3 feet high were absolutely designed to be discriminated against. I feel like I've questioned a couple of times whether or not this is before or after guards. I'm pretty sure it's before, and this drives home that I think that it's before. At the time of guards, I think Ankh Morpork was becoming a little less racist. I think more non-human people were moving in. Speciesist? I don't know what word you use in a fantasy setting. Probably racist. Especially considering they just said racially prejudiced here in the book. The giant prodded Hwel on the top of his head.
"Where's your fishing rod, lawn ornament?"
he said. The barman pushed the mugs across the puddled counter.
"Here you are,"
he said, leering.
1 pint, and 1/2 pint.
Oh, boy. Tom John opened his mouth to speak, but Hwel nudged him sharply in the knee. Put up with it. Put up with it. Slip out as soon as possible. It was the only way. Sharky say there was at least the dwarf bar in guards, yeah. Which Carrot visited. And in general, I think there were a lot more dwarfs indicated by that. This I'm kind of assuming, based on this description, that there are probably not very many dwarfs in Ankh Morpork at this time.
"Where's your little pointy hat, then?"
said the bearded man. The room had gone quiet. This looked like being cabaret time.
"I said, where's your pointy hat, dopey?"
The barman got a grip of the blackthorn stick with nails in, which lived under the counter, just in case, and said,
I was talking to the lawn ornament here."
Was the barman not the one that said 1 pint and 1/2 pint? Seemed like it. The man took the dregs of his own drink and poured them carefully over the silent dwarf's head.
"I ain't drinking here again,"
he muttered, when even this failed to have any effect.
"It's bad enough they let monkeys drink here, but pygmies—"
Well, I feel like that's going to be the last we'll be seeing of this guy. Now the silence in the bar took on a whole new intensity, in which the sound of a stool being slowly pushed back was like the creak of doom. All eyes swiveled to the other end of the room, where sat the one drinker in the mended drum, who came into Category C. What Tom John had thought was an old sack hunched over the bar was extending arms and other arms except that they were its legs. A sad, rubbery face turned toward the speaker, its expression as melancholy as the mists of evolution. Its funny lips curled back. There was absolutely nothing funny about its teeth. Said the barman again, his voice frightening even him in that terrible simian silence.
"I don't think you meant that, did you? Not about monkeys, eh? You didn't really, did you?"
"What the hell's that?" hissed Tom John.
"I think it's an orangutan,"
said Hwel.
An ape. A monkey's a monkey, said the bearded man.
At which several of the drum's more percipient customers. Percipient. It's a word I don't feel like I see very often. Percipient. Several of the drum's more percipient customers started to edge for the door.
I mean, so what? But these bloody lawn ornaments.
Hwell's fist struck out at groin height. Dwarfs have a reputation as fearsome fighters. Any race of 3-foot-tall people who favor axes and go into battle as into a championship tree-felling competition soon get talked about. But years of wielding a pen instead of a hammer had relieved Hwell's punches of some of their stopping power, and it could have been the end of him when the big man yelled and drew his sword, if a pair of delicate, leathery hands hadn't instantly jerked the thing from his grip, and, with only a small amount of effort, bent it double. Footnote. An explanation may be needed at this point. The librarian of the Magic Library at Unseen University, the Disk's premier college of wizardry, had been turned into an orangutan some years previously by a magical accident in that accident-prone academy, and since then had strenuously resisted all well-meaning efforts to turn him back. For one thing, longer arms and prehensile toes made getting around the higher shelves a whole lot easier, and being an ape meant you didn't have to bother with all this angst business. He had also been rather pleased to find that this new body, although looking deceptively like a rubber sack full of water, gave him 3 times the strength and twice the reach of his old one. End of footnote. When the giant growled and turned around, an arm like a couple of broom handles strung together with elastic and covered with red fur unfolded itself in a complicated motion and smacked him across the jaw so hard that he rose several inches in the air and landed on a table. By the time that the table had slid into another table and overturned a couple of benches, there was enough impetus to start the night's overdue brawl, especially since the big man had a few friends with him. Since no one felt like attacking the ape, who had dreamily pulled a bottle from the shelf and smashed the bottom off on the counter, they hit whoever happened to be nearest, on general principles. This is absolutely correct etiquette for a tavern brawl. The Sharkies say, I wonder if, of all the Discworld characters, the librarian shows up in the most books. I think he's been in almost all of the ones I've read so far. Yeah, between the librarian and death, I feel like you've got a pretty good bet of it being one of those two. I would guess death is more likely. The librarian might have maybe the most screen time per se, although the books that are about death would skew that a bit. Pharma says pretty much any book where Ankh Morpork is a location, but death shows up pretty much any time someone dies. Yeah, close to. Unless they are, like, really unimportant. Like, I feel like yeah, I feel like the dragon probably killed a few people that death we didn't actually see. Sharky say I was just postulating, but I've only read about 10 so far. Oh yeah, no, I mean the librarian's a good choice, like a good choice. The librarian definitely does show up quite frequently. Um, but I think that there are probably books that the librarian does not make an appearance in, whereas I do not know whether or not death is in every book or not. Pharma says this might be one of the only witches books the librarian is in. Well, definitely the equal rights, if you're counting that. But yeah. Also, I've only read about 10 so far, says Sharkies. Only. I mean, to be fair, how many Discworld books are there? I think it's 30 something, but I guess I don't know for certain. Oops. I accidentally typed in Disco World. 41. There are 41 books. And I think I've read most of them. I think there's only a couple that I have not read. Which I should get around to at some point, but it'll happen when it happens. There's a few of the later ones that I don't know, I feel too bummed out to read. Especially because I feel like you can notice the writing changing a bit towards the end, and that makes me sad. Like, I could really feel like the last Guards book felt different. I don't know, a lot more grim and, like, harder for me to follow, I guess. Anyways, where was I? Correct etiquette for a tavern brawl. Hwell walked under a table and dragged Tom John, who was watching all this with interest, after him. So this is roistering. I always wondered. I think perhaps it would be a good idea to leave, said the dwarf firmly. Before there's, any trouble. There was a thump as someone landed on the table above them, and a tinkle of broken glass. Is it real roistering, do you suppose, or merely rollicking? Said Tom John, grinning. It's going to be bloody murder in a minute, my lad. Tom John nodded and crawled back out into the fray. Hwell heard him thump on the bar counter with something and call for silence. Hwell put his arms over his head in panic. I didn't mean, he began. In fact, calling for silence was a sufficiently rare event in the middle of a tavern brawl that silence is what Tom John got. And silence is what he filled. Hwell started as he heard the boy's voice ring out, full of confidence and absolutely first-class projection. Brothers! And yet may I call all men brother, for on this night... The dwarf craned up to see Tom John standing on a chair, one hand raised in the prescribed declamatory fashion. Around him, men were frozen in the act of giving one another a right seeing to, their faces turned to his. Down at tabletop height, Hwell's lips moved in perfect synchronization with the words as Tom John went through the familiar speech. He risked another look.
The fighters straightened up, pulled themselves together, adjusted the hang of their tunics, glanced apologetically at one another. Many of them were in fact standing to attention. Apparently Tom John's even better at this than Carrot. Even Huel felt a fizz in his blood. Let's see. Sharky says, one wiki I just looked up, Sat Death at least shows up in all Discworld books except 2. The Librarian is in about 24. Alright. Yep, that sounds right. Which 2 are not, is Death not in? I would guess maybe some of the, like, children's books? Like Amazing Morris or something like that? Wee Freeman and Snuff. What? Death wasn't in Snuff? That's the one I was just talking about that felt different to me. And Death not being in it at all kind of holds with that. That's really weird. Like, Snuff is a murder mystery sort of style of book. So it's pretty unusual that Death is not in it. But like I said, the writing in that one was feeling different to me. And that's like, that one came out, I think, after Sir Terry's Alzheimer's diagnosis had been made public. And I believe his daughter was helping with the writing. Maybe? I can see it not being in We Free Men. Farmo says, I think one of the guys who did like compendiums with him. Even Huel felt a fizz in his blood, and he'd written those words. He'd slaved half a night over them, years ago, when Vittular had declared that they needed another 5 minutes in Act 3 of The King of Ankh. Scribble us something with a bit of spirit in it, he'd said. A bit of zip and sizzle, you know. Something to summon up the blood and put a bit of backbone in our friends in the halfpenny seats. And just long enough to give us time to change the set. He'd been a bit ashamed of that play at the time. The famous Battle of Morpork, as he strongly suspected, had consisted of about 2,000 men lost in a swamp on a cold, wet day, hacking one another into oblivion with rusty swords. What would the last king of Ankh have said to a pack of ragged men who knew they were outnumbered, outflanked, and outgeneraled? Something with bite, something with edge, something like a drink of brandy to a dying man. No logic, no explanation, just words that would reach right down through a tired man's brain and pull him to his feet by his testicles. Now he was seeing its effect. He began to think the walls had fallen away, and there was a cold mist blowing over the marshes, its choking silence broken only by the impatient cries of the carrion birds. And this voice. And he'd written the words. They were his. No half-crazed king had ever really spoken like this. And he'd written all this to fill a gap so that a castle made of painted sacking stretched over a frame could be shoved behind a curtain. And this voice was taking the coal dust of his words and filling the room with diamonds. Sharky say, what a visual. Yep, sorry for that one. I made these words, Well thought. But they don't belong to me. They belong to him. Look at those people. Not a patriotic thought among them, but if Tom John asked them, this bunch of drunkards would storm the patrician's palace tonight, and they'd probably succeed. Farmouse likes the line about taking the coal dust and making them diamonds. I just hope his mouth never falls into the wrong hands. As the last syllables died away, their white-hot echoes searing across every mind in the room, Quill shook himself and crawled out of hiding and jabbed Tom John on the knee.
"Come away now, you fool," he hissed, "before it wears off."
He grasped the boy firmly by the arm, handed a couple of complimentary tickets to the stunned barman, and hurried up the steps. He didn't stop until they were a street away. "I thought I was doing rather well there," said Tom John.
"A good deal too well, I reckon."
The boy rubbed his hands together. "Right. Where shall we go next?"
"Next!"
"Tonight is young."
"No, tonight is dead. It's today that's young,"
said the dwarf hurriedly. Sharky say, "Fly, you fool." "Well, I'm not going home yet. Isn't there somewhere a bit more friendly? We haven't actually drunk anything." Quell sighed. "A troll tavern," said Tom John. "I've heard about them. There's some down in the Shades." Footnote. The Shades is an ancient part of Ankh Morpork, considered considerably more unpleasant and disreputable than the rest of the city. This always amazes visitors. End of footnote. "I'd like to see a troll tavern."
"They're for trolls only, boy. Molten lava to drink and rock music, and cheese and chutney flavored pebbles."
Rock music. There's an entire book about rock music. I guess this kind of came before that. Oh, all right. "What about dwarf bars?"
"You'd hate it,"
said Quell fervently.
"Besides, you'd run out of headroom."
"Low dives, are they?"
"Look at it like this. How long do you think you could sing about gold?"
"It's yellow and it goes chink and you can buy things with it," said Tom John experimentally, as they strolled through the crowds on the plaza of Broken Moons. 4 seconds, I think."
"Right. 5 hours of it gets a bit repetitive."
Quell kicked a pebble gloomily. He'd investigated a few dwarf bars the last time they were in town. Okay, so dwarf bars are here now. And hadn't approved. For some reason, his fellow expatriates, who at home did nothing more objectionable than mine a bit of iron ore and hunt small creatures, felt impelled, once in the big city, to wear chainmail underwear, go around with axes in their belts, and call themselves names like Timkin Rumbleguts. And no one could beat a city dwarf when it came to quaffing. Sometimes they missed their mouths altogether.
"Anyway," he added, "you'd get thrown out for being too creative. The actual words are gold, 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 gold."
"Is there a chorus?"
"Gold, gold, 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 gold,"
said Quell. "You left out a gold there."
"I think it's because I wasn't cut out to be a dwarf."
"Cut down, lawn ornament," said Tom John. There was a little hiss of indrawn breath. Sorry, said Tom John hurriedly. It's just that father.
I've known your father for a long time, said Well. Through thick and thin, and when there was a damn sight more thin than thick. Since before you were born.
He hesitated.
Times were hard in those days, he mumbled. So what I'm saying is, well, some things you earn.
Yes, I'm sorry.
You see, just...
Quell paused at the mouth of a dark alley.
Did you hear something?
He said. Sharkies are singing the Spam song. They squinted into the alley, once again revealing themselves as newcomers to this city. Morporkians don't look down dark alleys when they hear strange noises. If they see 4 struggling figures, their first instinct is not to rush to anyone's assistance, or at least not to rush to the assistance of the one who appears to be losing and on the wrong end of someone else's boot. Nor do they shout, "Oi!" Above all, they don't look surprised when the assailants, instead of guiltily running off, flourish a small piece of cardboard in front of them. "What's this?" said Tom John.
"It's a clown," said Well. "They've mugged a clown."
"Theft license," said Tom John, holding the card up to the light. "That's right," said the leader of the 3. "Only don't expect us to do you too, 'cause we're on our way home."
"'S right," said one of his assistants. "It's the thingy, the quota."
"But you were kicking him."
"Warl, not a lot. Not what you'd call actual kicking."
"More foot-nudging sort of thing," said the 3rd thief.
"Fair's fair. He bloody well went and fetched Ron here a right thump, didn't he?"
"Yeah, some people have no idea."
"Why, you heartless," Well began,
but Tom John laid a cautioning hand on his head. The boy turned the card over. The obverse read, you don't see that word too often either, obverse. The obverse read, J.H. Flannelfoot, Bogus, and Nephews, Bespoke Thieves, The Old Firm, established A.M. 1789. All type theft carried out professionally and with discretion. Houses cleared. 24-hour service. No job too small. Let us quote you for our family rate. There's a footnote somewhere here. Right at the end. It seems to be in order, he said reluctantly. Well paused in the act of helping the dazed victim to his feet.
"In order,"
he shouted,
"to rob someone." "We'll give him a chitty, of course," said Bogus. "Lucky we found him first, really. Some of these newcomers in the business, they've got no idea." Footnote: Ankh Morpork's enviable system of licensed criminals owes much to the current patrician, Lord Vetinari. He reasoned that the only way to police a city of 1 million inhabitants was to recognize the various gangs and robber guilds, give them professional status, invite the leaders to large dinners, allow an acceptable level of street crime, and then make the guild leaders responsible for enforcing it, on pain of being stripped of their new civic honors, along with large areas of their skins. It worked. Criminals, it turned out, made a very good police force. Unauthorized robbers soon found, for example, that instead of a night in the cells, they could now expect an eternity at the bottom of the river.
However, there was the problem of apportioning the crime statistics, and so there arose a complex system of annual budgeting, chits, and allowances to see that A. the members could make a reasonable living, and B. no citizen was robbed or assaulted more than an agreed number of times. Many foresighted citizens, in fact, arranged to get an acceptable minimum of theft, assault, etc. over at the beginning of the financial year, often in the privacy and comfort of their own homes, and thus be able to walk the streets quite safely for the rest of the year. It all ticked over extremely peacefully and efficiently, demonstrating, once again, that compared to the patrician of Ankh, Machiavelli could not have run a whelk stall. End of quite long footnote. I'm curious for the Sharkies. This is what the footnote looks like for me. So it's quite a bit smaller text and takes up still like half the page, especially when you consider that the license, the Thieves Guild license was taking up a lot of the page, so realistically there's much more footnote on this page than the rest of story. Are your footnotes equally small? Because maybe that's where some of the extra pages came from.
Alright, so some of these newcomers in the business, they've got no idea. Cowboys,
agreed a nephew.
How much did you steal?
Said Tom John. Bogus opened the clown's purse, which was stuck in his belt. Then he went pale. Sharky say smaller text, but 2/3 of the page. Okay. So that's a difference there, because mine still, like, physically takes up less than half.
Oh, bleeding hell,
he said. I think his voice just changed drastically there. I don't know what happened. The nephews clustered around.
We're for it, sort of thing. Second time this year, Uncle.
Bogus glared at the victim.
Well, how was I to know? I wasn't to know, was I? I mean, look at him. How much would you expect him, or how much would you expect him to have on him? Couple of coppers, right? I mean, we'd never have done for him, only it was on our way home. You try and do someone a favor, this is what happens.
How much has he got, then? Said Tom John.
There must be 100 silver dollars in here,
moaned Bogus, waving a purse.
I mean, that's not my league. That's not my class. I can't handle that sort of money. You got to be in the Guild of Lawyers or something to steal that much.
Womp, womp.
It's way over my quota, that is.
Give it back, then, said Tom John.
But I done him a receipt.
They've all got, you know, numbers on, explained the younger of the nephews. The guild checks up, sort of. Well, grabbed Tom John's hand.
Will you excuse us a moment?
He said to the frantic thief, and dragged Tom John to the other side of the alley.
Okay, he said. Who's gone mad? Them? Me? You?
Tom John explained.
It's legal?
Up to a certain point. Fascinating, isn't it? Man in a pub told me about it, sort of thing.
But he's stolen too much?
So it appears. I gather the guild is very strict about it. There was a groan from the victim hanging between them. He tinkled gently. Look after him, said Tom John. I'll sort this out. He went back to the thieves, who were looking very worried. My client feels, he said, that the situation could be resolved if you give the money back.
Yes,
said Bogus, approaching the idea as if it was a brand new theory of cosmic creation.
but it's the receipt, see? We have to fill it up. Time and place. Signed and everything.
My client feels that possibly you could rob him of, let us say, 5 copper pieces, said Tom John smoothly.
I bloody don't,
shouted the fool, who was coming around. That represents 2 copper pieces as the going rate, plus expenses of 3 copper pieces for time, call-out fees.
Wear and tear on Kosh, said Bogus.
Exactly.
Very fair, very fair.
I feel like Bogus's voice has changed about 3 times over this, couple of pages. Bogus looked over Tom John's head at the fool, who was now completely conscious and very angry.
Very fair,
he said loudly.
Statesmanlike. Much obliged, I'm sure.
He looked down at Tom John.
And anything for yourself, sir, he added. Just say the word. We've got a special on GBH this season. Practically painless. You'll barely feel a thing.
On GBH. You'll barely feel a thing. Pharmo says grievous bodily harm.
Hardly breaks the skin, said the older nephew. Plus, you get a choice of limb.
I believe I am well served in that area, said Tom John smoothly.
Oh, well, right you are then, no problem.
Which merely leaves, continued Tom John as the thieves started to walk away,
the question of legal fees.
What time are we at? Almost 8 o'clock.
I'll get into this next section for sure. The gentle grayness at the stump of the night flowed across Ankh Morpork. Tom John and Hwel sat on either side of the table in their lodgings, counting. $3 silver and 18 copper pieces in profit, I make it, said Tom John.
That was amazing, said the fool. I mean, the way they volunteered to go home and get some more money as well, after you gave them that speech about the rights of man.
He dabbed some more ointment on his head.
And the youngest one started to cry, he added. Amazing. It wears off, said Hwel. You're a dwarf, aren't you?
Hwel didn't feel he could deny this.
I can tell you're a fool, he said. Yes, it's the bells, isn't it? Said the fool wearily, rubbing his ribs. Yes, and the bells.
Tom John grimaced and kicked Hwel under the table.
Well, I'm very grateful, said the fool.
He stood up and winced.
I'd really like to show my gratitude, he added. Is there a tavern open around here?
Tom John joined him at the window and pointed down the length of the street.
See all those tavern signs? He said. Yes? Gosh, there's hundreds. Right. See the one at the end with the blue and white sign? Yes, I think so. Well, as far as I know, that's the only one around here that's ever closed. Then, pray,
Allow me to treat you to a drink. It's the least I can do, said the fool nervously. And I'm sure the little fellow would like something to quaff. Whell gripped the edge of the table and opened his mouth to roar. And stopped. He stared at the two figures. His mouth stayed open. It closed again with a snap. Something the matter? Said Tom John. Whell looked away. It had been a long night.
Trick of the light, he muttered, and I could do with a drink.
He added,
a bloody good quaff.
In fact, he thought, why fight it?
I'll even put up with the singing, he said.
What's the next word?
Scold, I think.
Ah! Whell looked unsteadily into his mug. Drunkenness had this to be said for it. It stopped the flow of inspirations.
And you left out the gold,
he said. Where? Said Tom John. He was wearing the fool's hat. Whell considered this.
I reckon, he said, concentrating, it was between the gold and the gold. And I reckon... He peered again into the mug. It was empty, a horrifying sight. I reckon,
he tried again, and finally gave up, and substituted,
I reckon I could do with another drink.
My shout this time, said the fool. Ha ha ha! My squeak! Ha ha ha! He tried to stand up, and banged his head. In the gloom of the bar, a dozen axes were gripped more firmly. The part of Whell that was sober, and was horrified to see the rest of him being drunk, urged him to wave his hand at the beetling brows glaring at them through the gloom.
It's all right,
he said to the bar at large.
He don't mean it. He very funny was name. Idiot. Fool. Very funny fool. All name from was place.
Lanker, said the fool, and sat down heavily on the bar.
'S right. Long name from was name. Sounds like foot disease. Don't know how to behave. Don't know many dwarfs.
Ha ha ha, said the fool, clutching his head. Bit short of them where I come from. Someone tapped Whell on the shoulder. He turned and looked into a craggy, hairy face under an iron helmet. The dwarf in question was tossing a throwing axe up and down in a meaningful way.
You ought to tell your friend to be a bit less funny, he suggested. Otherwise, he will be amusing the demons in hell.
Whell squinted at him through the alcoholic haze.
Who are you? He said. Grab Pot Thundergust, said the dwarf,
striking his chain-mailed torso.
And I say...
Whell peered closer.
Here, I know you, he said. You got a cosmetics mill down Hobfast Street. I bought a lot of grease paint off you last week.
A look of panic crossed Thundergust's face. He leaned forward in panic.
Shut up, he whispered. That's right. It was the halls of Elven Perfume and Rouge Company. Or Co.,
said Whell happily. The halls of Elven Perfume and Rouge. "For good stuff," said Tom John, who was trying to stop himself from sliding off the tiny bench. Especially your number 19 corpse green. My father swears it's the best. First class. The dwarf hefted his axe uneasily. Well, he said. Oh, but, yes. Well, thank you. Only the finest ingredients, mark you. Chop them up with that, do you? Said Hwel innocently, pointing to the axe. Or is it your night off? Thundergust's brows beetled again like a cockroach convention. Here, you're not with the theatre. That's us, said Tom John. Strolling players. He corrected himself. Standing still players now. Ha ha! Sliding down players now. The dwarf dropped his axe and sat down on the bench. His face suddenly softened with enthusiasm. I went last week, he said. Bloody good it was. There was this girl and this fellow, but she was married to this old man. And there was this other fellow, and they said he'd died, and she pined away and took poison, but then it turned out this man was the other man, really, only he couldn't tell her on account of... Thundergust stopped and blew his nose. Everyone died in the end, he said. Very tragic. I cried all the way home, I don't mind telling you. She was so pale. Number 19 and a layer of powder. Sharky say we've been to theatre nights like that, said Tom John cheerfully. Plus a bit of brown eyeshadow. Eh? And a couple of hankies in the vest, he added. What's he saying? Said the dwarf to the company at, for want of a better word, large. Hwel smiled into his tankard. You give him a bit of Gretelina's soliloquy, boy, he said. Right. Tom John stood up, hit his head, sat down, and then knelt on the floor as a compromise. He clasped his hands to what would have been, but for a few chance chromosomes, his bosom. You lie who call it summer, he began. The assembled dwarfs listened in silence for several minutes. One of them dropped his axe, and was noisily hushed by the rest of them. And melting snow. Farewell, Tom John finished. Drinks vile, collapses behind battlements, down ladder, out of dress and into tabard for comic guard number 2. 1. Entrance left. What ho, good! That's about enough, said Hwel quietly. Several of the dwarfs were crying into their helmets. There was a chorus of blown noses. Thundergust dabbed at his eyes with a chainmail handkerchief. That was the most saddest thing I've ever heard, he said. He glared at Tom John. Hang on, he said, as realization dawned. He's a man. I bloody fell in love with that girl on stage. He nudged Hwel. He's not a bit of an elf, is he? Absolutely human, said Hwel. I know his father. Once again he stared hard at the fool, who was watching them with his mouth open, and looked back at Tom John. Nah, he thought. Coincidence. What's that about? Why do you think Varent's the fool? Why does he keep looking back and forth between them? It's acting, he said. A good actor can be anything, right? He could feel the fool's eye boring into the back of his short neck. Yes, but
Dressing up as a woman, it's a bit, said Thundergust doubtfully.
Tom John slipped off his shoes and knelt down on them, bringing his face level with the dwarf's. He gave him a calculating stare for a few seconds, and then adjusted his features. And there were 2 Thundergusts. True, one of them was kneeling and had apparently been shaved.
What ho,
said Tom John in the dwarf's voice. It's kind of like what Silk does. This was by way of being a hilarious gag to the rest of the dwarfs, who had an uncomplicated sense of humor. As they gathered around the pair, Quell felt a gentle touch on the shoulder. You 2 are with a theater? Said the fool, now almost sober.
"'S right."
Then I've come 500 miles to find you.
And at 8:11, I think that's a good place to stop, because I'm feeling kind of hungry. Need to heat up the rest of my leftover chicken. Oof.
Well, there were some entertaining bits there. Everyone have fun? Harmo says, what ho? Person Brew says, yay, thanks. Hope you enjoyed. What did I just say? Books, booze? Books, brews? Did I just not I don't know. BBAB. BBAB. Any good plans for the rest of the week? Tomorrow I may go to Kung Fu, depending on how I'm feeling. And then Friday we'll be back here. Other than that, we are beginning the process of packing up our house. Sharky say, yes, the fool walked 500 miles, but would he walk 500 more? It's interesting that miles is the measure used. I guess I haven't really seen a fantasy setting that uses kilometers. Leagues is more likely. Books, Brews, not, nope, just gonna bust my butt trying to get all this work stuff done. Yeah, we've got packing to do. Packing and cleaning. We're not on a strict timeline because we're going to be trying to get like this place on the market for the end of June. So we've got, you know, over a month, but we're going to try and get it done in less time than that. Any Harry Potter fans here? Once upon a time I was. But I'm having trouble separating the work from the author, and J.K. Rowling has turned out to not be a terrific person. Sharky say, it's been weird this evening because we fixed the stream so we can see the video, but you can tell you're lagging about 15 seconds or more behind the convo in the chat. Oh. Huh. Tom Felton posted a sneaky message on Instagram that he's publishing an autobiography. I have worked with Tom Felton and also talked to him. Are we staying in the same area or are we moving far? We're probably moving at most like an hour from our current location. Somewhere like 45 minutes to an hour away driving. Yeah, something like that. So yeah, I was working on the time I was on The Flash, the TV show, the like CW superhero series, The Flash. And it was season 3, I think. And Tom Felton was like a regular in that season, or semi-regular, right? He was a recurring character. And at this time, it was winter. We can have a virtual housewarming party. Yeah, that would be great. It was winter, so I was wearing a scarf, and it was a Canadian Olympic scarf from when the Olympics were in Vancouver. And this particular scarf was black and white stripes. But we were in the stage, like the sound stage, and the light was quite dark in there, and it was mostly lit up with these fairly orange lights, so you couldn't fully make out the proper colors of the scarf, and so it kind of looked a bit like a Hogwarts house scarf. And so I realized when he was getting called to set that I was wearing this scarf. A fan art has fallen down? Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure maybe more than one. Yeah, I think 2 of them have fallen. I realized when he was getting called to set that I was wearing this scarf, and I looked at it and I go, oh no, I hope he doesn't think it's like a house scarf, because that would be kind of embarrassing. And he comes past and he looks over and he goes, oh, hey, nice scarf. And so I hold up the part where the like Canadian, Olympic symbols are and stuff, like the maple leaf with the Olympics, and I'm like, thank, it's from the Olympics. Because I was just like, crap. And so we had a bit of a talk about the Olympics and, what it does for an area when the Olympics come to town. Sharky say, the cake I made is currently staring at me through our cake carrier. It's a bit unsettling, so we plan to get to eating it this weekend and for the next week or so. I saw the picture of that cake. I feel like it was very close to the reference image that you worked off of. It was very close. Something about the eyes felt a little off, but otherwise it looked pretty good, honestly. Spokesperson Bruce says, thanks, it's from the Olympics. Yep, that was me. Just like, definitely saying it too quickly. Like, obviously, like, slightly panicked. Farmo says, I think I would have cut the bits with the eyes first. Okay, so Farmos agrees. Farmo says, please don't think I'm fanboying, thanks. Yeah, it was definitely a bit awkward. We had to completely rearrange a day of shooting on a Monday one day because he was supposed to feature prominently in that day's shooting, but he'd been down into the States over the weekend and had partied a little too hard and had lost his passport and couldn't get back into Canada. So he wasn't there, so we just had to kind of rearrange on the fly and do some whatever other scenes we had the people for. He seemed pretty cool. I think he had like a funky guitar with him a lot of the time that was all like painted up. Yeah, he was very friendly. Anyways, yeah, so I'm gonna go warm up some chicken. Any suggestions for anyone I should raid out to? None of my people are streaming right now. This person who says he plays it on his Insta sometimes. Oh, cool. So it's all like blue and green paint and stuff, right? I'm just trying to remember. It's been a few years. If it's the same guitar anyways. Like an acoustic guitar, but all painted. Yeah. So we'll see y'all on Friday. All y'all. The Mandevilles. It's great music from Canada. Cool. I'll have to look them up. Farmo says that sounds super familiar. Yeah, I don't know. It's possible. I remember, like last year, I did that Spotify recap thing where it like tells you your favorite artists and everything, and it apparently said that my like #2 top genre was Vancouver indie, and I was like, that is very specific.
Oh, was that? Oh, yes. Was that a raid suggestion or just a music suggestion? Both. Okay. I did not put two and two together. All right. Oh, I don't have too many requirements when it comes to raids. As long as, I don't know. I think I got it right. Yeah. Okay. Well, have a lovely evening, everyone, and hopefully I'll see you on Friday. Good night.